This has been 10 years of court and sometimes going nowhere.
Tonight, day school survivors will see a settlement to their claims of racism, abuse, and cultural loss now that it's been proved by the federal court.
And they kept saying over and over again the #1 barrier to not being able to go to work was a driver's license.
We go to Terrace, BC, where demand is high for a driving school serving First Nations.
About a year ago, Bruce Power came to leadership and said, we're going to start producing medical isotopes at this facility, and we're wondering if that's something your community could get on board with.
And how a nuclear plant is trying to warm up relations with the Saugeen First Nation. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Brittany Hobson. Nearly 200,000 Indigenous children attended federally run day schools, where they experienced harm and cultural loss. Now former students will see financial compensation. APTN's Amber Bernard reports.
The federal court approved the Indian Day School settlement on Monday. Former students who served as plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit say they're happy with the decision.
So when I got the call, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't. I said, repeat that to me again, repeat it. So he said it's approved, and then I let that sink in, and I was like, wow. Like, I was really happy in a sense. I felt this a peace, a very calming peace come over me, because I said to myself, and I could feel it, that there's, finally the justice for our children.
Really happy and relieved that it's finally done. This has been 10 years of court and sometimes going nowhere, so I'm relieved it's finally done.
The settlement includes compensation for students who experienced harm while attending a federally run day school. It starts at $10,000, and depending on the severity of abuse endured, it can go upwards to $200,000. Now,
I never thought that I would live to see justice. And for me, it's more than justice. It's validation that the government did wrong through their policy against the First Nations children. Validation that we as children, we suffered. Validation that our stories are finally heard, recognized, and respected. And that in itself being validated, it brings justice, it brings healing.
While the court's decision is considered a step in the right direction, Margaret Swan says it will never fix the past.
There's never going to be enough money to compensate the damage that's been done to our people. That's totally my take on that, and I've always said that. However, this money that's being provided to our people will help some of us to a certain degree.
Claudette Commanda wants to see the applications and compensation for survivors dealt with as soon as possible, because they are losing former students.
We do not want to to drag this on, because survivors are dying. Survivors are dying, and it's a well-known fact. I mean, because many of our survivors are they're 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, and we don't know what tomorrow brings, right? So we want to make sure that the survivors are they're eligible for the compensation, and that they receive their compensation. It belongs to them. Period.
Family members of Indian Day School students who have passed away will be able to make estate claims. There will also be a $200 million legacy fund for commemoration projects. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A small community in the Saugeen region of the Northwest Territories is one step closer to legally protecting wetlands by the Mackenzie River. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs traveled to Fort Good Hope to talk to locals on management of sacred waters. She brings us this.
No matter how unforgiving the weather, John Tezele hits the water, traveling the trails of his ancestors.
Beaver and muskrat would swim by on the shore next to your camp. And when you're young like that, you think that's the whole world, that's the way the world is or supposed to be.
Tuyata, also known as the Ramparts River and wetlands, connects to the Decho, the Mackenzie River. It's beside Tezele's home of Radelecan, Fort Good Hope, Northwest Territories. Kashiko-Gatne-Dene and Métis have been working since the 1990s to create legal environmental protection of the area.
Because outside every house there was just rabbits, you know, way before the white man came. And but what happened is that once oil and gas exploration started in the late 50s, early 60s, the rabbit explosions have never happened again.
This week, membership voted no to oil and gas development and yes to Indigenous governance over the 10,000 square kilometers of land and water.
Ranite, ranite.
Victorina Orlias fondly reminisces about her camp life in Tuyata. She says she's happy that control over the land will be returned to her people.
The land belongs to us, and we don't want the newcomers to damage our land and our water.
A lot has changed since Orlias was born in 1940, but she's hopeful that new jobs will be created with a promised guardianship program.
Young adults to go up there and check the land themselves. Yeah, it used to be just covered with people.
The final vote came back 94 in favor and 54 against. APTN reached out to several community members who voted against the establishment agreement, but were unable to receive comment by airtime.
We call it fei. Fei. It kind of means in the rocks or through the rocks.
For John Tesele, no matter what the conditions are on the water when he goes out, he now has peace of mind that his traditional homelands are protected. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Fort Good Hope.
A First Nation driving school in northern British Columbia will be getting $360,000 from the provincial government to help battle a problem, and that is many people who live in remote communities don't know how to drive. Lee Wilson reports.
All Nations Driving Academy in Terrace, BC provides driver training to remote First Nations communities in the north. Owner Lucy Sager used to work in the construction industry. Sitting with Indigenous community leaders in industries such as Rio Tinto and LNG, she came across stats from a database on who was available to go to work in the area, and she found out that First Nations people had a disadvantage.
And when it came to driver's license, what we found is only 5 to 45% of people on reserve had a driver's license. So that means up to 95% of people did not have a driver's license.
And it turns out that not being able to drive means that you might not be able to find a job.
And they kept saying over and over again the number one barrier to not being able to go to work was a driver's license. And as I heard this, I just thought, well, if I hear it one more time, I'm going to freak out. So why don't we just fix the problem?
This led to discussions with the BC government and Indigenous leaders. On August 15th, the provincial government awarded her company $360,000 to potentially train 600 people in remote communities.
Well, certainly I feel very humbled. I've worked with the province of BC for a long time in one way or another, but really this government has not only heard what communities are saying, but they've acted.
Sager's long-term goal is to make it easier for people in remote communities to take driving lessons.
And so what does it look like for a community to have their own driving schools, so their own instructors, their own vehicles? Because let's say that your high school is 60 kilometers away from where you live. So you go to school, you come home on the bus. How are you going to get back into town to have that driver training?
Sager was key in developing another driving school in Kitimat, and she's receiving calls from other nations eager for their members to be connected. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Terrace, BC.
The New Brunswick government has yet to fulfill one of its most controversial election promises to reopen the door to natural gas fracking in places like Sussex, where the Higgs government says there is support for it. Now, after almost a year, one of the key players in the gas industry says the uncertainty is becoming a problem. CTV's Mike Cameron explains.
With more than 24 wells in the Sussex area, Corridor Resources is the biggest player in New Brunswick's domestic gas industry. But the company is waiting for the fracking moratorium to be lifted in this area. In its latest quarterly report, Corridor points to a business environment of regulatory uncertainty. And the company wonders when or if Corridor's lands will become exempt from the moratorium. Corridor also expresses concern over coming consultations with the Aboriginal community. Predicting a timeline as to when the consultation process is completed is difficult.
We have to be properly consulted on the issue.
New Brunswick's Aboriginal Peoples Council says they have many questions about fracking.
What is actually going on here? Can it be done safely? Can it not be done safely? Is it going to affect the water? How is it going to affect the water? It's just the whole process. They have to come and sit down and properly consult.
Environmental groups say Native communities are being made into scapegoats.
The oil companies and the gas companies, and some kind of slow-to-the-case premiers, like to blame regulatory uncertainty and First Nations vetoes for just about everything.
Lois Corbett says smart investors are moving away from fossil fuels, but supporters of the natural gas industry say there are benefits that could be shared by all.
Out west, there's great track records of First Nations having equity pieces, getting trained for a lot of the jobs on site in oil and gas development. And in New Brunswick, there's a tremendous opportunity going forward for First Nations to become engaged.
The Higgs government has expressed faith in the future of shale gas development in New Brunswick, but for now the industry seems mired in that regulatory uncertainty, with no clear date on when the fracking moratorium will be lifted, even on a regional basis in the Sussex area. Mike Cameron, CTV News, Fredericton.
Coming up, we bring you the second part of our look at the relationship between Saugeen First Nation and Bruce Power. Here is Wednesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 28 in Charlottetown, 30 in Halifax, 16 with a mix of sun and cloud in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 18 in rain in La Grande River, 30 degrees in Montreal, 20 in Val d'Or, 28 and rain for London, Toronto, and Sarnia, 19 above in Thunder Bay, 15 in Big Trout Lake in northern Manitoba, 16 in God's Lake, 18 in the Pas, a sunny 20 in Dauphin, 22 in Gimli. In Saskatchewan, sunny skies and 25 for Regina and Estevan, 19 above in La Ronge, 20 in Uranium City. Welcome back. Last night we told you about a couple of First Nation communities that have had no choice but to share its territory with a mega nuclear power plant and how they are starting to work together. Here's Annette Francis with part 2.
Kathleen Ryan enjoys the time she gets to spend on the lake with the Coastal Waters team. Most of her days are spent behind the desk. She's the energy manager for Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. It's a big hat. She's the lead when dealing with Bruce Power, OPG, or Hydro One.
Here, the biggest change actually happened in 2018. Bruce Power had a license renewal hearing. So this was to renew the operations of their facility and to start this MCR project. So that's the refurb. So this is a huge project, again, huge economic driver. And so this basically would extend their operations in the territory till 2064. So right now we know that unless something major happens, that plant is operating in this territory till 2064.
Due to the nuclear giant's location, that's a big deal for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation.
Around here, all of these waters all the way around are in the traditional territory.
So they intervened, and that intervention resulted in the Coastal Waters Monitoring Project. It also sparked the beginning of a new relationship.
About a year ago, Bruce Power came to leadership and said, we're going to start producing medical isotopes at this facility, and we're wondering if that's something your community could get on board with. And leadership, okay, yeah, let's talk about that. So they spent a lot of time talking about that and what that meant.
Then just 3 weeks ago, the Medical Isotopes partnership between Bruce Power and the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation was announced. It means they'll work together in the worldwide fight against cancer to develop new isotopes. For Chief Greg Nadjawan, it's a step in the right direction, a sign they'll have more say in future developments and monitoring. His community is heavily dependent on the water for the harvesting of fish.
Up until recently, we were pretty well locked out of any kind of relationship or decision making with that corporation. At one time we were completely locked out. Consideration has grown through our insistence of being part of the process, and the relationship has improved.
Bruce Power is working hard to break away from that legacy of exclusion of the past. Its goal is to reset the relationship. Christine John says it's groundbreaking.
We recognize the importance of reconciliation and coming to terms with that legacy. And although we can't change the past, we can impact the future. So it's really important to both Bruce Power and the communities that this isotope partnership was established.
But there's much more that needs to be done. Chief Lester Anaquat is hoping to see equal opportunities in training and employment at the plant.
The MCR, the major mechanical replacement of the nuclear reactors, we have a major refurbishment coming up within the next 20 years. We'd like to go a step further with an equity share of the wealth.
Both leaders say their wish is to provide a healthy environment for their communities and a better future of hope and prosperity for their youth. The Medical Isotopes facility is expected to be in production by 2020. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Saugeen, Ojibwe Territory.
The Indigenous community makes its mark on this year's Pride celebrations in Montreal. More on that after the break. Here's the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 24 in Peace River, 25 in Grand Prairie, 32 and sunny in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge, 20 degrees in Vancouver, rain and 29 in Kamloops, 21 in Prince George. Here's the rest of Wednesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 24 in Peace River, 25 in Grand Prairie, 32 and sunny in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge, 20 degrees in Vancouver, rain and 29 in Kamloops, 21 in Prince George, cloud and rain and 21 in Fort Nelson, in the Yukon, 17 in Mayo and Beaver Creek. Over to the NWT, 17 in rain in Trout Lake and Fort Liard, chilly 9 above in Colville Lake, 17 degrees in Baker Lake and Chesterfield, 13 above in Cape Dorset, 8 in Clyde River. With an eye on hosting World Pride in 2023, Fierté Montreal made strides to include and celebrate Indigenous peoples in this year's programming, but their inclusion drew criticism from those unwilling to celebrate the province's more colorful communities. Lindsay Richardson has more.
Manicha Kabi is preparing to carry the torch for the Two-Spirit community in ways she never could before.
It was a rough road for about first 3 years of my coming out. My first pride was about being denied to go enjoy my life.
Much like the Stonewall riots, which kick-started the gay rights movement 50 years ago, Mani's earliest memories of pride are memories of resistance.
When I came out as a lesbian woman in 1988, I had a lot of battles with the First Nations and had battles with the white people because they didn't like me being who I was, so I didn't care. I was prepared to die for my own my own cause for my own who I am.
With the same raw conviction chronicled in her book, A Two-Spirit Journey, Mani came to Montreal from Thunder Bay to wear her colors as a Grand Marshal of this year's Pride Parade. An ambassador for the marginalized, leading the charge at the biggest gay pride festival in Canada.
I live by love, respect, and to honor yourself, who you are, and to believe in your own faith.
For years, Fiarité Montréal was subject of criticism among racialized communities who felt overlooked by official festival programming.
I was hoping to give a safer space to Two-Spirit people and know that they're acknowledged.
In a newly created position, Félicia Tremblay was mandated to diversify and indigenize Fiarté's offerings, a cause they say resonates personally.
Black Cherokee, Two-Spirit person, someone who's grown up in much oppression around a very non-cultural environment. I feel it's very personal for me to listen well, not to speak for the others, but mostly to listen well to them.
Following months of consultation with Indigenous nations in Montreal and beyond, Tremblay combined forces to erect a dedicated Two-Spirit space,
bringing in the elements,
home to a knowledge keeper and an art piece, which, like Two-Spirit identity, evolves constantly with time.
See, we didn't use that word in English, Two-Spirit. We call it Nijajajak, Nijumanitu. Nijumanitu is like a person who walks with the great ones, like the Great Spirit, the person who walks that road and does that journey.
Statistically, we are growing in numbers in these cities. It's important that we also take those spaces.
Through his research and public speaking, John Syllaboy works to educate and demystify the plight of queer youth navigating contention in urban settings unmoved by traditional Indigenous values.
In Quebec, it's a process by which a lot of people are stuck in between identity of language and identity of biculture. But a lot of that excludes Indigenous culture. A lot of that excludes Indigenous identity or even Two-Spirit identity.
It's hard to deny that Quebec's politics still draw a dividing line. Premier François Legault attended the weekend's festivities despite a petition hundreds strong calling for him to opt out altogether. Many believe provincial leadership is bolstering division among cultural communities and fueling far-right vitriol. Even with diversity at the forefront in 2019, a festival opening on the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, organizers logged thousands of hateful online comments, the most they've ever experienced.
When I'm trying to teach the young people, I want them to learn love is the most important thing. Love can conquer evil, or love can conquer hate. They're going to be our leaders one day. We don't want our leaders to be so messed up and confused. Look at our leaders today. They're all messed up and confused. There's so much work to do when you want to love somebody.
Blazing a trail for Two-Spirit pride in a world still divided by prejudice. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
And that's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can always find much more over on our website at aptnnews.ca and stay up to date with the latest by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Brittany Hobson. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.